It's a very tragic story. There was a man with a checkered pedigree, with a turbulent, chaotic backstory, who committed a grievous crime and was executed for it. In the Torah, there are two executions that happened for two people that committed two grievous crimes, and the first one is found in this week's parsha, the Mekalel, the blasphemer. All the way to the end of the parsha, we read a story about a man who blasphemed, and Moshe did not know what to do with him, and he put him in a holding cell, and God says this person is guilty of a capital crime, and he was executed. Now, when we read the story and we learn about this character, we find some very interesting, intriguing, perplexing, even baffling, but certainly instructive insights. The Torah spends a lot of time telling us who he was, his pedigree, his backstory, his parentage. You read a story about a criminal, and it doesn't even mention his name. We're not told his name. But we are told that he was the product of a mixed union. His father was Egyptian, and his mother was Israelite. Her name is Shlomis Bas Divri from the tribe of Dan. That's his mother. And his father was an Egyptian man. So he comes from a mixed union. Now, which Egyptian man? Very interesting. This connects a lot of the stories. When Moshe, he grows up and he goes out to investigate his brethren, and he sees an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man, and he looks right, he looks left, he sees there's no one watching, he kills the Egyptian man. And he buries him in the sand. That Egyptian man is the biological father, we're told, of this blasphemer. So a story from chapter 2 of Exodus and all the way over here at the end of Vayikra, Leviticus, we see a connection here. And we're told some more interesting insights. Chapter 2 of Exodus, Moshe sees an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man. Who's the Hebrew man? That's Dathan, the Midrash tells us. Dathan, the legendary malcontent rabble-rouser, the person who joins Korach in his rebellion, the person who's always a thorn in the side of Moshe and Aaron, the person who's always complaining, causing all sorts of trouble. And then we discover that the Egyptian man was striking the Hebrew man because the Hebrew man, Dathan, was the husband of this Shlomis Bas Divri from the tribe of Dan. And there was an act of infidelity, of adultery. And the adulterer, the Egyptian man, he wanted to kill the husband. So he began to strike him. Moshe sees it. Moshe stops it. And Moshe kills the Egyptian man and buries him in the sand. So you put the sources together. It's a very interesting backstory here, background, pedigree. We have a man. We don't know his name. His mother, Shlomis Bas Divri from the tribe of Dan. His biological father is an Egyptian man, the Egyptian man that Moshe killed. But his biological mother's husband, the jilted husband, is Dathan. That's who this person is. And in our parsha, we read that he has the ignominious distinction of being the first person executed in a Jewish court of law. Very interesting. Now, when we study this story, we find some very interesting and unexpected curiosities. Rashi tells us that this person who became a blasphemer was a convert. Now, when you see that, you say, wait a minute, convert is someone who was not part of the tribe, was not part of the nation, and he joined the nation. But this person, you're telling me, the blasphemer, his mother's Jewish, his mother's Shlomis Bas Divri, his father was Egyptian, sure, but his mother was Jewish. We know the principle. It's known as matrilineal descent. We know a principle. If someone's mother's Jewish, they're Jewish. So why does he have to convert? That's the question many of the commentators asked. And one explanation is that, well, the principle of matrilineal descent is only after Sinai. But because this person was around in the times of Egypt, this is before Sinai. Moshe is in Egypt, the nation's still there. It's before Sinai. This principle does not apply. He would have to have both parents being Jewish. Only one was, and therefore he needed to convert. But if you recognize this insight, you discover something fascinating. We have a person, he's the only person on record born from a mixed union. One Egyptian parent, one Israelite parent. And we're told that he converted. He made a choice. He chose to join the nation. He voluntarily opted in. He converted. And we know that there were many, many Israelites that opted to stay behind, that did not join the nation in the Exodus. We've spoken about this many times. 80%, we're told, 4/5 of the Israelites stayed behind. 4/5 of the Israelites did not want to leave Egypt. They had so thoroughly assimilated into Egypt and the Egyptian way of life and the Egyptian values and the Egyptian gods that their Israelite identity was forfeited. So we have the overwhelming majority, 80% of the Israelites with two Israelite parents, they opted out of the Exodus. And we see this blasphemer who has a choice. He's not an Israelite, but he opts in. He becomes a convert. He was willing to make sacrifices to join the nation. And nevertheless, he had this episode of blasphemy and was executed. Now, we discover something else about his backstory. His mother's name is Shlomis, daughter of Divri. Shlomis, daughter of Divri. So the commentaries tell us that the word Shlomis is from the word shalom, which means high or peace, but it's like a word of greeting. And this woman, she was always greeting people. And the word Divri is from the word dvarim, which means words. She was a chit-chat. She was a bit flirtatious, and that got her into trouble. That's what the commentaries say. But the Midrash says something else. The word Divri is etymologically connected to the word dever, which means pestilence. 10 plagues in Egypt. The 5th one is the plague of pestilence. The animals died. All the Egyptian animals that left outside died. Only the ones that were inside the barns survived. And the verse tells us that every single Egyptian-owned animal that was left outside perished. Not even a single Israelite-owned animal died. It was totally lopsided. That's chapter 9, verse 6 of Exodus. And then verse 7, we read how Pharaoh sent investigators to go inspect the damage. Go see what happened. There's this episode of pestilence. Go see what happened. Go see who the casualties were by. And the verse says that these inspectors, they discovered that there was almost no casualties amongst the Israelites. There was actually one animal, one Israelite-owned animal that did die. So the Midrash says what happened over here. We have this blasphemer, this unnamed blasphemer. His mother is Shlomis bas Divri. His father is the Egyptian man that Moshe killed. His presumed father, meaning his mother's husband, is Dathan. So everyone's under the impression that his father is Dathan. But halachically, he's an Egyptian. So his animal, Betsy, she was outdoors. The plague of pestilence comes, fifth plague, and the animal dies. And Pharaoh sends scouts, inspectors, investigators to survey the entire land. And they discovered there was a single casualty from an Israelite-owned animal. And that's why Pharaoh was able to deny the miraculous nature of this plague. It wasn't just us who suffered. Yeah, there was some sort of plague, some bug, some infection, some pandemic that struck all the animals, and it killed all sorts of animals, Egyptian-owned animals, and even Israelite-owned animals. Look, we see one example of that. And that gave him the strength to deny the miracle and to not send the Israelites out. And the mom is called Divri. Divri is hinting at the plague of Dever, of pestilence. Now, the truth is, the reason why the animal perished, because the animal was actually, in truth, an Egyptian-owned animal. But no one knew that. Pharaoh didn't know that. And therefore, Pharaoh assumed that this was an Israelite-owned animal. So we see something very fascinating. We see a person who, due to no fault of their own, was born a bastard. Their mother had consorted with this Egyptian man, and the circumstances of that are not clear. Was it willful? Was it an assault? But regardless, the kid's born with no fault of their own, and they're just part of they're a product, a progeny of a mixed union, of adultery, of infidelity. And halachically speaking, they're not part of the Israelite nation, and they suffer. They're an Egyptian, really, halachically, and they suffer. His animal died. But he decided to choose to join the Israelites. He had an affinity for his mother's nation, and when the Exodus comes, 80% of the true Israelites, of the unquestionable Israelites, stay behind. He joins. But sometime later, he blasphemes, and he was executed. And Rashi tells us the circumstances of his outburst. The nation was divided up in camps. There were 4 quadrants. Each quadrant was comprised of 3 tribes, and they were on the 4 different directions. And in the middle was known as the camp of the Levites. And the different Levite families were surrounding and protecting the epicenter, which was the tabernacle. And that's how the nation was oriented. And this person, he wanted to pitch his tent in the camp of the Danites. He said, listen, my mother is from the tribe of Dan. So which tribe should I belong to? Which tribe should I pitch my tent in? I'm going to go to the tribe of Dan. So he brings his tent and all of his possessions, And he starts pitching his tent in the area allocated for the tribe of Dan. And before long, some people come and say, what are you doing here? Excuse me, sir. This is the area allocated for the tribe of Dan. You, my friend, are not welcome. And he says, why not? My mother's from tribe of Dan. Yeah, your mother's from tribe of Dan, but your father's an Egyptian. And here, these lands, or this area in the camp is designated exclusively for those who come from the tribe of Dan via their father, not via their mother. And he insisted, no, I belong over here. Now, parenthetically, we would all say, this is so important. Why are they squabbling over this person who wants to pitch his tent by the tribe of Dan? Just let the guy be there. Why are they making such a fuss? Because this question was escalated. It went to the courts. And they came to the court of Moshe, the supreme court of the land. And the Danites presented their case, and this person, son of Shlomis Bas Divri, and an Egyptian man, he made his case, and Moshe ruled that the Danites are correct. But you and I would say, it's so petty. Let the guy pitch his tent there. It's petty. What difference does it make? Why are you making such a big deal over such a triviality? That's what all of us would say. But the commentaries tell us something absolutely amazing. The Torah spends a lot of time detailing exactly where all the different tribes encamped. Which 3 tribes were to the east and to the south and to the west and to the north, and the different families of the Levites. And even within the tribes, there were specific allocations of which areas were for which tribes in a given quadrant. And even amongst the tribe, intra-tribally, it was different families. And even within a family, every person knew exactly where they needed to be. Why is it so important who encamps where? Why can't it be like Southwest? It's family-style seating. Sit wherever you want. It used to be like that. Now you got to find the middle seat with 2 large people on either side, each one getting the armrest. A painful 3 hours awaits. What's the big deal? Why does the Torah spend so much precious time talking about the different camps and the different tribes and the different flags and the different families, the different orientation of the nation when they encamp, how they break down the camp, how they travel? Commentaries tell us something absolutely fascinating. We know that there are 600,000 root souls, 600,000 members of this nation. And there are 600,000 letters in the Torah. And therefore, if you knew exactly which letter corresponds to which soul, and you had 600,000 souls, you can orient them in a precise way that from a 50,000-foot view, they are a living Torah scroll. Theoretically, if you knew which soul was which letter, you could actually write the whole Torah, not with the ink, with the letters, but with the souls. And the layout of the camps was the writing of the Torah scroll. That's what it was. And therefore, everyone had to be exactly in the right place. Because everyone represented a letter, every soul represented a letter. And it was oriented precisely in a way that spelled out the entire Torah. Comes along this Danite, and he doesn't belong. He's out of place. He is going to corrupt the entire Torah scroll. It's a huge deal. The Danites are not willing to accept this. It goes to the courts. It escalates all the way to the Supreme Court. And Moshe rules that because he's not really a member of this tribe, he cannot encamp with the Danites. he was disenfranchised. And he was mad. And he was enraged. And he stood up. And he blasphemed. Now, it's not enough for someone to, God forbid, blaspheme for them to be guilty of a capital crime. Capital crimes can only be meted out if there is forewarning. The witnesses have to tell the person before they do it, be aware. If you commit this crime, we will take you to court and we will have you executed. And the person must say, yes, I know. I'm fully aware of the consequences and I'm doing it nonetheless. He blasphemed when there were witnesses present. And the witnesses forewarned him and he knew exactly what he was doing. And he said verbally, I accept the terms. I know exactly what's going to happen to me and I'm doing it nonetheless. This is like not suicide by cop. It's almost like a form of suicide where he's fully aware of what he's going to do and he does it nonetheless. He's opting in. It's a fascinating character arc. He's, due to no fault of his own, born to this union. Egyptian father, Israelite mother, Shlomis Bas Divri. No one knows it. It's discovered later on. He's actually an Egyptian. His animal dies in the plague of pestilence. But he wants to convert. He wants to join the nation. And his conversion is sincere, is genuine, is wholesome, is wholehearted. 80% of the nation says we don't want to leave Egypt. And he's alienated. He's ostracized. But he joins. And then when he finds no place, no home, as it were, he is a pariah amongst the Danites, he blasphemes in front of witnesses with forewarning, with verbally acknowledging the consequences of the action right before he did it. All the requirements to mete out the execution were present, and the blasphemer was executed. There's a lot of ways to try to understand the deeper message of this story. You have the capital punishment angle to it. This is the very first capital punishment documented in our nation. But we're told so much about this character and his meltdown, his eruption, and his voluntary choice, as it were, to blaspheme, knowing the consequences. Let's try to share maybe an angle with a very powerful, life-changing lesson. If you think about it, there's a logical gap in the blasphemer's thinking. He has a dispute. It's a property dispute. His permissibility to encamp with the Danites. He loses the court case. He does not have the right to encamp with the Danites. So what's the solution, or how does he determine the right course forward? He blasphemes, knowing that he's going to be killed, be executed. He accepts the forewarning. What is the mechanism? What's the thinking? What's the calculus of this blasphemer? I want to suggest that there is a common mode of operation that people have. That's not logical. That's actually the result of the evil inclination that can cause people to make terrible, grievous, detrimental, irreversible mistakes. In our parshas, it ends with the story of the blasphemer, but it begins with how a priest, a Kohen, has to behave when a relative dies. A Kohen cannot become impure, cannot have any contact with a dead body, cannot even be in the same enclosure as a dead body. But what if, God forbid, their parent passes away, their father, their mother, their brother, their sister, their wife, or the most tragic of them all, their child, God forbid, their son, their daughter? In that case, the Torah tells us that with the 7 closest relatives, father, mother, sister, brother, son, daughter, wife, a priest may participate, and in fact must participate in the funeral and in the mourning, even though they will become impure. The only exception to this rule is the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, even for these close relatives, cannot become impure. But following the laws of impurity, the Torah tells us, well, how must they conduct themselves when they are in the throes of anguish over the passing of their loved one? So the verse tells us that they cannot engage in self-harm, in self-flagellation. They cannot rip out their hair, rip out their beard, inflict themselves with wounds, make gashes in their skin over the dead. They experience pain and misery and suffering. Nevertheless, they are forbidden to inflict a wound to themselves. It's a mitzvah in the Torah, and it's told by the priest, but really it's applicable to all. The way to respond to the death of a loved one, it's not via self-flagellation. Now, if you think about it, the Torah is warning us about something because otherwise, if it didn't warn us about it, we would do it. Or there's a human tendency to do this. There's a need to warn someone, don't do this. Now explain to me the logic. God forbid, someone loses a relative. It's such pain, trauma, sadness, depression, awful. But what's the response? To pull out your hair? To pull out your beard? To make wounds in your skin? Like, why would that be a logical next step for someone who loses a relative? Why is that a suitable response to the pain of a deceased relative? The Torah is telling us that there's a tendency that when something very painful happens, there's an illogical, counterproductive instinct to cause yourself pain. It's very illogical, very perverse. But there is this tendency. Something bad happens to you. You experience pain in one area. You feel an urge to compound your losses, to willfully inflict self-harm as a continuation of your disappointment, of your misfortune. That's what the Torah is telling us. And the truth is, the Talmud tells us that this is the handiwork of the Yetzer Hara. What he does is try to get you on a destructive path. You make one mistake, and then you could be on this continual death spiral, as it were, where there's a certain buildup of momentum. You yield to the evil inclination. Now you're unstable. You're likely to now succumb a second time, a third time, a fourth time, a fifth time, a 10th time. And before you know it, there are endless concessions. And it's almost impossible to stop the bleeding. I think of it as like a if someone cheats on their diet, and before you know it, they're binging. Or it happens a lot with people in investing. They make a small mistake, and it's kind of hard to stop digging. You find yourself in a hole. They say the best thing you got to stop digging. Why do you have to say that? Because we have a tendency, you make a mistake, to just make more and more and more and more mistakes. To cut your losses is hard because the Yetzer Hara wants you to get into this destructive pattern. It's a certain tendency that we have. And when someone is in a bad situation, they're in a painful situation, they're suffering, there's this impulse to have continuity, to just continue to do bad things, to enter a vortex of pain, of suffering. Someone, God forbid, loses a family member. They're feeling pain, deep pain, unfathomable pain. And the Torah tells us you have a likelihood, a tendency to deliberately cause yourself even more pain. Even though we have ordinarily an instinct for self-preservation, for pain avoidance, nevertheless, when there's misfortune, there's the opposite impulse, self-pain, self-sabotage. Says the Torah, don't do that. It's forbidden. That's how the parsha begins. The parsha ends with the blasphemer. He has a legitimate gripe. It's not his fault that his parentage is checkered. He was punished because he was an Egyptian, halachically speaking. And he made a valiant, courageous, and rare decision to say, I want to align myself with the Israelites. And notwithstanding his sacrifice, he was ostracized. The Danites said, you're not welcome over here. Where's he supposed to go? Now, the truth is that there was a place for him to go, but it was outside the camp with the mixed multitude. But the mixed multitude, they came from total Egyptian parentage. He at least has a claim to Danite ancestry. So he felt pain. He was rejected. And it was escalated to the Supreme Court. Moshe ruled that he was wrong. He was pained. He was aggrieved. And he exacerbated this by saying, if I cannot have what I want, I'm out. Burn the bridges. I'll have nothing. He didn't know how to properly process his disappointment, his misfortune, his loss, his pain. He unraveled. And he made the fatal decision to blaspheme, knowing that he would get executed, which he indeed received that punishment. You think about the counterfactual. What will be the counterfactual? Let's say the blasphemer says, you know what? This is what the ruling is. I accept it. This is what Moshe is telling me in the court. I accept it. This is the will of God. I accept it. What would the legacy have been had the blasphemer accepted his fate? I mean, again, he has a very good argument. It's not my fault. Why should I suffer for the misdeeds of my biological parents? It's not an easy question for us to answer. But imagine a world where he just accepted his fate. The Talmud talks about the mamzer, the bastard. In an episode of adultery or incest, the child born from that union is illegitimate and cannot intermarry amongst the Jewish people. Again, the child did nothing wrong. Did nothing wrong. It's not their fault that their parents committed a sin in his conception, and they have to suffer for the misdeeds of their parents. Talmud tells us, ultimately, their fate is in their hands. If there's a bastard, a mamzer, and he becomes a great Torah scholar, he's truthfully on a higher level and worthy of more honor than a high priest who's not a Torah scholar. There's the great equalizer. Ultimately, your choices determine your fate. If there's, God forbid, a mamzer who becomes a great Torah scholar, how does heaven view such a person? Notwithstanding the terrible cards that were dealt in life, they overcame that. In heaven, they're viewed with tremendous respect, with reverence. Think about the distinction. Due to no fault of your own, you were dealt a poor hand, and nonetheless, you overcame that and made something great of yourself. Had the blasphemer just accepted the ruling of the court, pack up their tent, move outside the camp, recognize that this is what the Almighty wants of them. This is how the Almighty set it up. We don't know why, but this is their fate, and they accept it. This person would have been an exemplar of indomitable faith. He would have been viewed as a paragon of accepting the ruling of God. And he would have been a hero. Because look, 80% of the Israelites stayed behind and you joined. And you were punished as an Egyptian and you joined nonetheless. It would have been a great legacy. But the ruling was too painful for him. And he made the very poor choice to allow the snowball to just grow and grow and grow. And his legacy is nothing but infamy. The first person to ever be executed. It's a story of shame and disgrace, and it serves for us as a cautionary tale. I think about, my grandparents. My 4 grandparents and my wife's 4 grandparents, so all 8 of our grandparents, all of them were Holocaust survivors. And all of them had multiple family members that were murdered in the Holocaust. And we know there's a lot of people that they couldn't rebuild themselves after the war. They're survivors, but they had survivor's guilt. And they had trauma. Everyone had trauma. But they couldn't restore any sort of stability to their lives. And of course, there's legitimate questions they can have. What's God thinking? How can he possibly do it? It's so unfair. They were broken in spirit and body. They were all orphans. Their lives were in tatters. It could have been so easy for them to just give up. We look at them not only as survivors, but we marvel at the Herculean strength of character for them to not only have productive lives, but to build beautiful families and to create incredible legacies. The Yetzer Hara wants us to just lose everything, to unravel completely. And we have to realize that life, inevitably, for everyone, will have disappointments. And there's this urge, it's not logical. It's the byproduct of the Yetzer Hara. There's this urge when something bad happens to you to say, oh, just give up. Just give up. And the real show of strength and the real determinant of someone's ascent in life is what do you do in the aftermath of a bump in the road? You fell down. You floundered. You blundered. You made a mistake. You were on such a good path, and then look what happened. Yetzer Hara wants you to say, ugh, I just give up. I give up. I'll never be able to do it. I give up. What difference does it make if I just fail? You have a bad day, and suddenly you can have a bad week, a bad month, and a bad year. That's exactly what the Yetzer Hara wants. A little chink in the armor, before you know it, you lose it all. We have a whole story here with so much detail in the backstory of this person and all of his legitimate arguments. They're all legitimate. And we see just the self-destructive decisions that he made. He was not able to cut his losses. He exacerbated his misfortune. It led to his demise. Now, the beautiful thing about this is that there's the opposite story. We see someone who experienced misfortune making it worse and worse, a snowball that led to his death and to his ignominious end. Truth is, there's the opposite. There's the snowball that leads to heaven. When someone has a little bit of success, they feel emboldened. Wow, look at what I could do. Let's try it again tomorrow with one notch higher. The Mishnah tells us, it's very short, very concise. Mitzvah, goreres mitzvah. One mitzvah drags the second mitzvah in its wake. An avera, a sin, goreres avera, drags a second sin in its wake. There's the power of momentum. When you are ascending, each step in your ascent makes the next step more reachable. And the opposite's true as well. Momentum heading in the opposite direction is also a force to be reckoned with. Whichever way the momentum is going, it's going to go, or likely to go in that direction, and it's hard to stop it. Which is why it's very important to get a small win. There's a custom to make a resolution on Yom Kippur. A resolution. And some people say, you know what? I want to finish all of Talmud, at least 5 books of Talmud this year. And I'm going to make sure I'll never speak Lashon Hara, and I'm going to make sure that I'll be on time for prayer, and I'll never be late, and I'll pray with all my intensity and devotion, just like I pray in Yom Kippur with all my intensity and devotion. And that's a very noble place to arrive at. But what's the best way to get there? One small step. Because one small step tomorrow will be also a small step, but slightly larger. And then the next step will be slightly larger. And it will grow. And it will augment. It will increase. And it's geometric. Because it grows and grows and grows. And before you know it, you reach what you actually want to get. You start racking up the wins. It's small wins, it's unimpressive wins, but you're pointing the rocket in the direction of ascent. And once you have liftoff, the hardest inch for the rocket is the first inch. And the second inch is also very hard, but it's a little bit easier. Once you're a mile up, well, that's the hardest mile of the hundreds of thousands of miles that you want to do. That's how it works. The momentum can lead you to the stratosphere in both directions, positive and negative. I always think about my grandfather, blessed memory. His books, unbelievable. His accomplishments, his institutions, his students that he built. And it's kind of depressing. You compare your abilities to such luminaries. Just think about the volume, the voluminous impact of his writings. The principle of positive momentum, it's something that we have to always remember. And maybe it's cliche, platitudinal, but you write one clear word, and you write a second clear word, and a third word. Before you know it, you have a sentence. It's an idea. It's a thought. It's like a little notch, a little accomplishment. And you know what? When you have a nice thought, a clear thought, a well-reasoned thought, the second thought will be a bit easier. If you have one discovery in Torah, it's very hard to achieve that. But the hardest one is the first one. You build a momentum. Your brain has been upgraded. Your soul has been unlocked. one notch. The mitzvah drags a second mitzvah in its wake. And again, the opposite is true. Momentum is like a force. It's a force multiplier. When it's heading in the wrong direction, it could very, very quickly escalate. And you could fly off the rails very quickly. The doomed rocket can lead to devastation, catastrophe. We see an incredible example of this. Again, this is someone that made excellent choices and had legitimate gripes with the system, legitimate complaints against what was done to him. He had one failure, and the Torah tells us he made a second choice, and ultimately he was executed. A sin breeds another sin, and it could bring you down to terrible places. But the opposite is true as well. A mitzvah drags another mitzvah in its wake. Positivity is self-reinforcing. If you could just get a little bit liftoff, that first inch, it's the hardest one. But you're heading in the right direction. The second inch, also very hard. But you're on the right trajectory. And all that work to get 1 inch off the ground is now going to make it a little bit easier to get another inch off the ground. Of course, once you're airborne, you still need a little bit of propulsion. But once you have the momentum, it's much, much easier to do. The power of momentum in both directions is a lesson that can transform our lives. I appreciate you listening to this message. We read the story each year of the blasphemer, and it's not just a historical account, a documentation of events of yore. It's not just a trivia question, who was the first person executed in Jewish court of law? It's a powerful insight that can dramatically improve our ability to achieve stratospheric greatness. And after all, that's what we're trying to do. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. I look forward to your questions, comments, and feedback. Nay, I await your questions, your comments, and your feedback. rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.